Welcome back to the Snap. Michael Heaver here alongside my co-host, of course, Patrick O'Flynn. And Patrick, a huge set of elections. We're seeing some of the results come through in drips and drabs, but already it appears that what we've been saying about the huge trouble the Labour Party are in, that also seems to be playing out.
Yeah, when people say, I hate to say I told you so, they seldom mean it, and we don't mean that today. Unlike 90% of the television pundits, we've been calling it for weeks, if not months, that this was a crisis for Labour and Keir Starmer and not for the Conservatives and Boris Johnson. And that is exactly how it's turned out to be. And you're getting now the Robert Pestons of this world suddenly discovering that the Labour Party is out of tune with the values of mainstream Britain, particularly working class Britain. So the sinners are repenting. They're becoming instant experts. But, you know, we were there from the start explaining what was going to happen and explaining why.
Absolutely. And of course, a lot of the coverage people will have seen will have been in the Hartlepool by-election. We had that result early this morning. Of course, we saw the Conservatives there up 23 points. The Conservatives getting a majority of the vote there, 52%. Labour down 9 points to under 30. And I think one of the things that really stands out, Patrick, that we've been doing here on the Snap is we've actually been looking at the evidence, the actual research on what people think, not following the Westminster narrative. And one of the most important bits of information I think I saw for the election was that in Hartlepool, when voters were asked, do you prefer Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer, Boris Johnson was favoured, I think, by around 53%, Starmer by less than 20%. If that's the case in Hartlepool, imagine what that gap looks like elsewhere across the country.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a rejuvenated Boris factor coming through. You know, back in the day, he managed that in London. But I think now in places a long way from London, much to the shock of the Westminster bubble and the left-wing media and the metropolitan set who despise him and what he's done in politics, that basic appeal and campaigning ability and compelling character that he presents seems to have swayed an awful lot of people. And I think, as you were saying a week or two back, the spectacle of him being hounded by the political class seems to have rebounded in his favour personally. So it is a big personal victory for the Prime Minister. There's no getting away from that.
Absolutely. Just to go through at time of recording what some of the results are looking like that you may not have heard about. Well, it looks like the Tories have won the Cleveland Police and Crime Commissioner election on the first round. 74,000 votes for the Conservative versus 39,000 for Labour. Well, I'm hearing that Northwest Durham, the first two Conservative gains from Labour, the Conservatives winning every single seat in Redditch. In Dudley, the Conservatives up 12 to 23, Labour down 11 to 3. Patrick, I could go on, but we are seeing a trend here.
We certainly are, and those Dudley Council results, I think, are very telling for what's likely to happen with the West Midlands mayoralty, which was one of the key tests for Labour. They should have been able to take that mayoralty back that Andy Street only won by a whisker last time, but it looks like they're going to be defeated by a very large margin indeed. And this fact of the Black Country towns turning Tory, sort of in disgust at what they see happening in the big cities, which are still Labour, like neighbouring Birmingham, I think that's going to be a trend across the country. Keir Starmer obsessing about procedural issues, you know, Sir Philip Rutnam versus Priti Patel, or how the Standards Commissioner should get to hire and fire ministers, and going on about the ministerial code, and seeming to want to have the unelected state of posh London people, you know, in charge of the country, completely backfired.
Well, how ridiculous does that photo shoot that they did in John Lewis look now, where they thought, you know, we'll play to the bubble and you know, he looks like a bit of a tit now. But I think what's interesting about the Tories being so far ahead in the Cleveland Police Crime Commissioner elections, Patrick, is this Ben Hoochin in Tees Valley. And we've heard a lot about this, how this is, and I think you were tweeting out some of the betting or looking at some of the betting odds. I was as well. And, you know, the fact that this is so odds on now, basically the analysis has been that Labour had no chance in Tees Valley. These now seem to be safe Tory holds. Quite incredible stuff.
They do. I think what's happening across the northeast, it's kind of the most accelerated area for this trend. And even I think some of the Sunderland council results, Labour are losing in one place to the Tories, in another I think the Lib Dems, presumably for a good local campaign, have made a gain. And it's almost like the former northeast heartland, where they weighed the Labour vote, it's almost narrowing down to just Newcastle. You know, and even the northeast towns are turning Tory, and in Newcastle it will be increasingly dependent on the student vote and the wider university vote. And so if they're losing the northeast, they've lost Scotland. You know, the West Midlands looking terrible for them. I guess Liverpool and Manchester are still going to be kind of northern heartlands. But what we're seeing now is Labour on the precipice, really, of sliding into total irrelevance.
I mean, you mentioned the northeast. I've just looked up what the Sunderland result was, Patrick. This is Sunderland now. Labour down 9 to 15, Conservatives up 6 to 8, and also the Lib Dems up 4 to 5. And as you mentioned, you keep mentioning, you know, Liverpool and Manchester and London, but outside of those big cities, we could realistically now see the next general election there being hardly any safe Labour seats in the country. We could see them absolutely annihilated beyond even the 2019 general election. And the point is, you know, if the Tories can take Hartlepool, what seats in England can they, can Labour really count on not losing?
Well, I think they would probably count on some of the more glorious university seats, maybe, you know, York, Cambridge, the Norwich seat that Clive Lewis holds, Exeter and Ben Bradshaw. They will count on their big cities. But then beyond that, almost no town seat in the country is safe. You know, you look across Yorkshire, and, you know, Ed Miliband in Doncaster and Yvette Cooper in Normanton, Castleford, Pontefract. They're anomalies now. They're not the standard, oh, they've sent a former special advisor up north for a safe seat for a career. They're looking completely surrounded by blue territory and on the wane. So I think, you know, any seat that's a town, provincial, you know, it's just miles away from the Labour Party's values. And I think a central estimate would be Labour coming back after the next election with fewer seats and not more. I don't particularly see where their gains are, but I see where their potential losses are.
And finally, Patrick, something I just want to touch on is very, very early reports that Sean Bailey early on leading the polls in London for the London mayoral race. Now, of course, in terms of the pre-election polling, we saw Sadiq Khan with a commanding lead of 12 points, but that was down from about 26, 25 points back in March. So it did basically halve through the course of the campaign. So that could, I mean, we could see potentially a closer contest there. But what's interesting there, and it's something I know you've spoken about, Patrick, as well, is the potential threat to Labour on the left, which is, you know, a Green Party that could potentially increase support. And indeed, the last YouGov poll before the London mayoral race, the Green Party were on third place on 10%.
Yeah, it's looking from those early results that on that first round, the Green candidate, Sean Berry, will easily beat the Liberal Democrats into third place, probably on 10 or 11% of the vote. Now, you know, that's not necessarily critical this time round, but it indicates a potential trend there. We talk about, you know, all the heartland working class people who've alienated from the Labour Party. But if Keir Starmer tries to tilt back towards them, then on the other side, he's going to lose his young, urban, graduate, woke fraternity. And the Greens is, you know, it's a nice fresh offer, isn't it? It's the big issue of the moment. They might not, those young people might think this party hasn't got so much negative baggage and such a history of feuding. They probably need to learn more about it to find it has. But in general terms, it's a fresher offer. And we've seen in countries like Germany, where the Greens have slightly moderated some of their positions, that they've absolutely elbowed aside the traditional establishment left of centre party to become the main party left of centre. And so Keir Starmer cannot afford to let any kind of green bandwagon gather pace. It'll cause Labour enormous difficulties in the university cities and the inner cities. And he can't afford to let that happen. So that makes it even more hard for him to make any sort of pitch towards social conservative provincial voters whatsoever. I can't see how Labour can get out of this particular hole.
Well, we'll have to see if the rest of the results that unfold are as bad for Labour as the ones we've seen so far. Make sure you hit subscribe and the bell, guys, so you don't miss the next episode. As me and Patrick pick through the rest of the results after they come in. Patrick, we'll speak again soon.
Looking forward to it.